whilst I'm introducing our next group of speakers, we're saying, there are some futurists out there who think that there's only really three things we need to worry about in the world. One is climate change. Secondly is how you make the world nicer and less unequal. And the third is AI. So that third point, actually, and I don't think we thought enough about the impact of AI in the world on social care and where we're going. It's either scary or really exciting, perhaps both. And great to hear all those mentions of social care futures. We've got a session now. We have Louise Robinson, we have Fiona Carragher, and we have Conn O'Neill. Really, really grateful. We've been working over the last year or so with Newcastle and with Louise, but also with Conn, and we're very grateful to Roche for their support for some events we've been doing around the country and indeed here today. So thanks. Thank you, Roche. Thank you, Conn. And let me immediately pass over to Professor Robinson to kick us off.
Thanks, David. Okay, thank you, and it's lovely to be here and spend a bit of time thinking about Sally and all the years that I worked with her, and to see such a successful conference and the ILC moving forward in a very positive way. So, for my moment in the spotlight, I'm sure Fiona's going to talk to you about the bigger picture and the costs and figures associated with dementia, and I'm sure Conn is going to talk about drugs. But I'm going to talk about care. And care is very much the Cinderella when it comes to dementia. And David's point about where have we come, how have we moved on in the last 25 years? Well, in terms of dementia, we don't have any magic new drugs than when I was a GP from 25 years ago. But in some ways, in terms of care, and we should be in a much better place. In terms of policy, we had a national dementia strategy in 2009. This was followed by a Prime Minister's National Dementia Challenge with David Cameron spearheading dementia. So in terms of policy, and certainly when you look at Alzheimer's disease international reports on how we're doing in Europe, the UK is top of the league in terms of policy-related initiatives on dementia, and also in research. But where we don't do so well in Europe, and where we're firmly in the bottom third, is access to care and support. And why is that the case in a country that has actually spearheaded dementia from a policy perspective? And dementia is one of the most costly long-term illnesses, because people require not just healthcare needs, but social care needs, and their needs need to be integrated in that care. So it's important about, as we said, for smarter working. So I'm a GP, and a few years ago, I got fed up of hearing people with dementia and their families telling me the same things I'd been hearing for the last 20 years about their inability to get access to information, to support, to anything that would help them live well with the illness. And so we wrote a grant to the Alzheimer Society and very kindly funded us, thanks Fiona and a team, for 5 years of work to look at what was happening with post-diagnostic care in England and Wales, and to see if we could work out the best way of doing that. What was the most effective and cost-effective way of doing that? Could we find the answers? And of course, in the middle of that period, NICE produced some dementia guidelines in 2018, and there was a lot of research there. But that was very much focused on, if you like, the drugs and the interventions, the non-drug interventions, that actually can make a difference. And what I was interested in was models of care, systems of care. How do we bring it all together to make sure that it's integrated and working well from diagnosis through to end of life? Unfortunately, our findings weren't that optimistic, David, I'm sorry to say. What we found, and we started off by doing a survey in England and Wales, and although we didn't get a high response rate, we got very good geographical representation. And what we found was that the postcode lottery for dementia care in 2019, before COVID, was even worse than we thought. So there were people who lived just a few kilometres from each other, but the services that were available to them were very, very different. And not only were there these even bigger geographical inequalities in care than we thought there'd be, there was fragmentation and fragility. So systems were often not linked up. Memory services often didn't know what was happening in primary care. Primary care wasn't linked up to social care. And with the introduction of clinical commissioning in community and primary care services, that had led to dementia often slipping down the bottom of the list, depending on what commissioners thought was their priority in their areas. But actually, what we were very interested in was not just seeing what the current status quo was, but what good looked like. How can we make a difference? So we started to look for examples of what people thought were good services, but not just good, sustainable, where services had been going for longer than 2 years and were being repeatedly funded and were not just supported by short-term funding. And we picked 6 of those case studies and we went into those sites and we observed the services, we talked to people, service users, we talked to service providers. And what we came up with was something called the components of care, 20 core components that included nice evidenced care, but also things like having a named lead professional who would follow that person through their journey, having integrated, joined up services across the pathway. While my team in Newcastle were doing that work, my colleagues at UCL in London were taking a more global approach, and they were looking internationally at, if you like, what the current international evidence said. They were looking, especially with a view at looking at how primary care and community care might be more involved in dementia care. So shifting, if you like, shifting care into the community as most people want. And they did a systematic review, which is a traditional way of looking at all the randomized control trials out there. And they found in a nutshell that models like it happens in the Netherlands, where you have a nurse expert, if you like, somebody who's a clinical expert in dementia, based in the community, working across primary and secondary care, providing a bridge between services and into social care, but also not just supporting families, but providing a source of expertise to GPs and primary care teams who are not experts in dementia, was not just the most clinically effective model, but potentially, from our LSE colleagues, cost-effectively looked as if it might be the most promising model. We also looked at factors that influence what led to better dementia care, and we came up with our intervention, which has a clinical dementia expert, an Admiral nurse based in the community, not just providing direct care for people with dementia and their families, but acting as a source of expertise, of expert knowledge to the GP teams that they're working with, and also acting as a bridge and a link to social care and secondary care so that there's faster access for people with dementia. And we're currently testing that out in Newcastle and in London in practices. We've also been using our findings to work with our funders, the Alzheimer Society, and with ILC, or our partners, to inform some key documents that the Alzheimer Society have led on, if you like, what is the current state of dementia care? What does good look like? How can we make it different? What do we need to do to make a difference? And it's not rocket science. We know a lot of this. The problem is it's just not getting into practice. And why is dementia different? Why should somebody who's diagnosed with dementia not have someone who's diagnosed with cancer access to the same sort of high-quality, person-centred care? And I think certainly a big moment for me was that our study, our PRIDEM programme, featured as only one of 5 or 6 potential models in the World Alzheimer's Report this year, which was actually focused on post-diagnostic care. Thank you.
Thank you. And can I now introduce Fiona from the Alzheimer Society to add her take as, please go on.
Thank you very much. So thank you, ILC, for inviting me today. I can't let this moment pass without saying a huge thank you from Alzheimer's Society to Sally for everything she's done. She was an enormous champion for people affected by dementia, particularly in her role as the co-chair of the all-party parliamentary group. So we wanted to really note that. I'm going to set out a hopeful vision for 25 years' time for people affected by dementia, and it's really grounded in what people affected by dementia tell us now. But I'm going to caveat it with the reality of where we are now. So there's 900,000 people living with dementia in the UK, and that number is set to rise to 1.6 million in the coming decades. So the scale is huge. We know the cost in the last couple of years, an estimated cost of £35 billion to society, both in terms of healthcare costs, social care funded costs, but a huge amount of unpaid carer costs in that as well. We also know from earlier discussions that we have a social care system that is not supporting people affected by dementia in the way that they need to. We know that there's issues of access, there's issues of quality, and huge issues of cost. On the health side, the COVID pandemic has dropped our diagnosis rate of dementia to 62.1%. That was our latest figures in August. So that's tens of thousands of people worried about their memory that are still waiting through the NHS to get their assessment in the memory assessment clinic and then get access to try and find that seamless care and support that we've heard from Louise is just not there at the moment. Dementia is a pathology. It's caused by diseases such as Alzheimer's disease, like Lewy body, and we currently have no disease-modifying therapy that will stop or slow progression of the disease. There's hope on the horizon, and I'm sure Conn will maybe talk to some of that. But we lag hugely behind in terms of investment in the dementia agenda. So where can we get to in 25 years' time? And I think there's a whole series of things that will get us there. The first is that dementia has to be a priority at national government level. It needs to be cutting across government, not just in health and care, but in research, in housing, in communities. But we also have to see that every local health and care system has a population-based strategy, understanding the needs of those people in that local area and preparing for the future. The second element is about data, driving innovation and improvement. We need data across health and care that is comprehensive, is routinely collected, and a key pillar of the health and care system across the UK. It will be an international benchmark. People will look to us in the UK, and it will drive not just research, but the service improvement that we want to see. Most importantly, what people with dementia are telling us is the most important thing. So their experience, their outcomes will be embedded in commissioning arrangements, in the way that we do things. And there will be regular collection of that data so that we have an improvement programme on the ground that really focuses on what matters to people affected by dementia. On diagnosis, we will have innovative diagnostic technologies which will be quick and easier to enable those with dementia to get their diagnosis and then have more time later in life living their fulfilled lives. We won't be frightened. As a society, we are frightened to go and seek help if we're worried about our memory. We won't be frightened as a society, and early and accurate diagnosis will be the norm. In terms of treatments, we will begin to really understand the mechanisms that cause these diseases, and that a suite of disease-modifying therapies will be approved and they'll be part of NHS regular care. They will begin to slow down the disease, but we will also have a focus on those debilitating symptoms that are causing crisis, and moments where people are having to go into residential care when actually it's not what they want to do. And we will have global preventative strategies in place to ensure that we're doing all we can to reduce the risk of developing dementia in the future. In terms of post-diagnostic support, from Louise's point, it's not rocket science. You need a named expert person who's going to help you through the dementia journey that Andy talked about, so that you get that seamless step into that tailored and personalised support and care that you need. But our care services will be properly funded, they will be personalised, they will be sustainable. And plans will be in place to enable people to live in the communities that they call home. We will have evidence-based, not just for diagnosis and treatments, but for care and for end of life, and that will be adopted everywhere locally. In terms of the research agenda, we know the biggest challenge we've got to getting any new drugs and therapies through is participation into clinical research. a future will be that far more people will be referred to and involved in research in the same way as they do for cancer. It will be part of the way that we do things. There will be national efforts as well as local practice to ensure that dementia research participation is a part of everything that we do. But on funding, we want to ensure that the government is really putting its weight behind this, because noting the scale and impact on our economy and society, there will be long-term programmes, decade-long strategies for dementia, and partnerships across industry, charities, but particularly those with dementia, to ensure we're working on the right things. And to Louise's point about adoption and getting these things into clinical practice, we need communities of good practice right on the ground that support, that challenge, that innovate to ensure that that people with dementia get the really high level of care and support that they have. And that will mean that the workplace around dementia will be something that people want to come into. Our researchers, our academics, but also our care staff, our NHS staff will be valued, because this is an important part of what we want to do as society. And then just finally, a couple more points. The first is about the voice of people affected by dementia. I think Andy was incredibly powerful earlier, telling you about what mattered to him. And we have to see a shift in this. People affected by dementia need to be directly driving the government's agenda on this. And as a society, it will be no longer politically acceptable to do nothing around this agenda. Because ultimately, what people affected by dementia tell us at Alzheimer Society is that they want to be supported, they want to get their diagnosis at the right time, to have a suite of treatment options, to take part in research, but to have that seamless support into the personalised post-diagnostic support that they need, and that tailored, flexible care that they will need going into the future, so that they can live the fulfilled lives in communities they call home. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And Conn, thanks again for your support for the session and for ILC, and just pass over to you.
Thanks very much, David. Last Monday morning, I woke up at 5 a.m. That's not normal for me. I'm not an early riser. But it was the day that Roche was going to publish the results of our clinical trial on a late-stage candidate of a drug for Alzheimer's disease. And it was like Christmas morning. I've worked on dementia policy for 2 years. And I'm not affected by dementia personally. 52% of people in the UK are. They either live with or know someone who has dementia. So I'm really fortunate that I don't, but the last 2 years I got to know a lot of people who do, and I've got so much respect for those like Fiona and Louise who've worked in that sector for a really long time. But I felt very personally invested in this. The results came at 6 a.m. Our colleagues in Basel in Switzerland suited their own time zone rather than ours. And they were negative. The trial didn't meet its primary endpoint, and you can imagine we were incredibly deflated in the organisation. Not only because of the impact on those people who'd been in the trial, but because of the level of hope and ambition we had for how much could change. My vision for how dementia care could be in 25 years, and my colleagues probably thought I was being a bit fast and loose with it, but I thought we could get there in 3 or 4 years. And that wasn't just as a result of the potential of that treatment. I mean, all it would likely have done, and hopefully others will come along soon and might achieve this, is you delay. But it would have been the start of a really incredible journey. And we will get there. Between now and the next 25 years, we'll move there. The job in large part passes back within Roche to those who are at the lab bench and working from a science perspective, although also our colleagues in our diagnostics business who are ensuring that even in the absence of disease-modifying treatments at the moment, we do move towards diagnosis. And for all of the reasons that Louise has outlined, post-diagnostic support is incredibly important, but the bit that's often missing in that is actually the diagnosis itself. Fiona has highlighted that the government target, which is really not very ambitious anyway, of 66%, they aren't meeting. They got close just before COVID, and it slipped back somewhat embarrassingly. We have had a dementia strategy. We had the first dementia strategy in the world, and one of the internal targets at Roche for in advance of a potential drug launch was to secure a dementia strategy in your country, and we thought, great, job done. It's done 10 years before we even got working on this. But of course, it's now expired. It's been out of date for 2 years. The Challenge 2020 is a world that we're just not in anymore. The experience of people with dementia through COVID was greater and more extreme than anyone else, and they deserve a better outcome and a better future. One of the things I'm very grateful over the last few years is I've been afforded the resource and opportunity within Roche to delve into that community, and we've been able to utilize, for example, our data science team, and Fiona highlighted the importance of data. We have next to no idea where people with dementia really are in this country. The diagnosis rate is determined. We know the raw numbers of people who've been through diagnosis. That is relatively easy. But to determine your diagnosis dementia, your dementia diagnosis rate, you need to compare that with how many people actually have dementia in an area. So if you think there are 100 people and you have diagnosed 70, you give yourself a pat on the back and you say, well, we've got a 70% diagnosis rate. Very well done. But if you really study and you work out, and we've seen, for example, kind of some relatively sort of top-line information about older people living in coastal communities or now flocking to mid-Wales, but no area with the same kind of population of older people is the same. There's a lot of information now about the prevention of dementia. 40% of dementia cases are linked to preventable attributes, and that ranges from things like obesity, being overweight, all the way through to even GCSE results can give you an indicator at a population level of how many people are likely to have dementia in that area. And what we can see is that town where you thought you might have 100 people, really the other modifiable factors mean that there are 150 people there. So 70 diagnoses is not impressive. It's actually far below the government target. We're working at the moment with OHID, the Office for Health Inequalities and Disparities, to share our algorithm and modelling. We hope in the future that will allow, even without the injection of additional resources, a slightly different allocation and allow us to get to where people are. But it does require bold political ambition, which an expired strategy shows we don't have. That's both on the research side, where our colleagues are now pushing away, but it is also on the implementation side. I agree with Fiona that getting recruitment into trials, it is hard and it is a massive challenge. But when we sat in our office looking at the potential launch of a drug, there were a million other challenges on our plate, that the relative prospects of a licensed and effective treatment actually reaching patients with dementia was low. And that was because politicians are hiding behind structures and concepts that were built for another world. So NICE is nominally independent. One of the things we heard a lot through the Brexit referendum was about parliamentary sovereignty. And if Parliament truly is sovereign, and if the Secretary of State for Health sits there, NICE is only ever independent for as long as they choose not to direct it to interpret in a different way. And in the case of dementia, the impacts and benefits are far beyond of transforming it, are far beyond the health system. It's about wider society and what we can do there. We're not going to be able to drive that forward with legitimacy now, and what we'll do is we'll share our insights, our learnings in the short term with organisations like the Alzheimer Society, and we will be cheering them on from the sidelines. We will have a role to play, but it will be a while before we're back at the fore. So this might be my last talk on dementia for quite some time, but I have enjoyed the opportunity. And I have seen, not perhaps personally living through it, but it's a little before my time, and it goes beyond your 25-year history, David, but I listened on my train ride in this morning to an audiobook. I'm quite a fan of political biography. So maybe pharma lobbyists are not quite as cool as actuaries, but I'm listening to one about Nixon at the moment, and Nixon laid down a challenge on cancer, and the impact and the direct result of his global political challenge on we need to research dementia had consequences that we're still feeling now. Of course, in some ways, that means that in the dementia space, we've been unlucky that they got there first and they maxed out the credit card to an extent. But that's not a reason to say that we don't invest in dementia care. It's a moral and ethical barrier that if it had come first and we were now looking at, for the first time, drugs or treatments or interventions that might help extend life, we wouldn't shy away from it. And I think that's the piece I would leave everyone with, is just think, why do we accept the arguments and discussions that put dementia into a box that has been created for a completely different disease category? Why do we allow politicians to hide behind a veil of saying this is independent or this decision was made? It's not on, and we all have to individually push on that and change the narrative. So I'm very grateful for the time I've spent working on dementia policy. I'm looking forward to seeing how it moves, and I feel that in 25 years, it's got to be better than it is now.
Brilliant. Thank you all so much. Really, really great to have you here. And again, I think there are some questions I know, and what I'm going to do is draw some of them in later on, but also please do grab our speakers during the break and lunch if that's okay. But thank you very much for joining us.